Aloha and good afternoon. It is 2:31 p.m. on Wednesday, March 1st, 2023, and I call the Committee on Housing, Sustainability, and Health meeting to order. Welcome to Vice Chair Kia Aina, Council Member Toba, also Council Member Se. I believe Council Members Dos Santos, Tam, and Okimoto will be arriving shortly. Before we start our meeting, I have some procedural announcements to make pursuant to HRS Section 92-3.7. This meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony on all items on the agenda when each agenda item is taken up in two ways: remotely and in person in the council chamber. Persons who have registered to testify remotely by video conference or phone will be called upon first. Once all remote testifiers are testified, I'll proceed to in-person testimony in the council chamber. Persons who have not registered will be given an opportunity to testify following the oral testimonies of the registered testifiers. Before testifying, each person shall state their full name. Each speaker will be limited to a 1-minute presentation per item. HRS Section 92-3.7 requires all votes at remote meetings to be conducted by roll call unless unanimous. Therefore, if any objections are noted, I will call for a roll call vote. I don't believe any council members are participating remotely. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, may be posted by the city clerk and available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones for the duration of this meeting. And first, for action agenda item number 1, Bill 4, relating to the adoption of the State Energy Code. I believe we have Managing Director, or I have Director Apuna.
Aloha, Chair and members of the council. My name is Jiro Sumada. I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Planning and Permitting. Director Apuna sends her regrets that she can't be here to present.
Yeah, mahalo, Deputy Director.
Presenting on behalf of the department.
Perfect. And I believe there's a presentation, I don't know if it's yourself or also Director Gonser from CCSR that will be doing it.
Yes, he's here with me also.
I'll turn it over to you folks.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of nervous. It's like I'm getting flashbacks from my time here before, so I got to stick to the script, so pardon me if I read my talking points. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of the department to present the Energy Code. I'm joined with Matt Gonser from the Executive Director from the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resilience, and Ben Sullivan, the Energy Program Manager for CCSR. Next slide. The Energy Code that we're presenting is a series of codes that our department oversees. The Energy Code actually does 3 things. First, it sets minimum efficiency requirements for new buildings. Second, it assures reductions in the energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. And third, it increased cost savings for occupants over the life of a building. And it is one of many codes that we administer at DPP. Next slide. So I just wanted to kind of go over the process. So the International Code Council prepares the IECC 2018 code. Then the state is allowed to make amendments to that code that affect all counties. And then what's before us today, or before you today, are the local amendments that we want to make for our ability to administer the code on Oahu. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Matt Gonser, and he can go over the details of what the changes that we are proposing. So Matt.
Aloha, good afternoon. Matt Gonzer, Executive Director for the City's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Picking up from where Deputy Director Sumata left off, just a reminder of the Council's efforts around ensuring life and safety, and these efforts around energy efficiency, conservation, and long-term affordability. In both the Resilience Strategy and the Climate Action Plan, there are two actions related to progressive and regular updates of the suite of codes that Deputy Director mentioned. And certainly we want to ensure that we can mitigate risk. That's really where, say, the building code comes into effect, a lot of the life safety measures in terms of wind and flood mitigation. And then in particular around climate action, affordability for once small businesses or residents are in these facilities is critical for not just addressing immediate costs, but really thinking about affordability as a package, inclusive of utilities. And really the energy efficiency code that we're talking about here today was identified in the Climate Action Plan as the most important measure for ensuring efficiency. The most important measure for reducing emissions over time is greening our grid, but for the efficiency, conservation, and long-term affordability, it's ensuring that we have progressive progress on the building energy conservation code. And the question that we had as a new administration going into this new code cycle was really thinking about opportunities for win-win costs. We know that there are concerns around upfront costs for development and the impacts on construction and our affordable housing crisis. But what are ways that we can package that with sensible cost-saving measures that really tackle both affordability of construction and then affordability for occupants in those buildings. And really the charge that we had in front of us, and we're appreciative of the stakeholders that engaged with us openly in this effort, was to have an open and robust engagement and transparent process, really finding ways that we can move towards performance so that the code itself is not so prescriptive. It really helps to define what we're trying to accomplish and then leverage the expertise of designers and the construction trades to meet those goals. So that's around performance-based codes for performance pathways for the code requirements, and really helping to make the regulations a little bit more easier to navigate. And we think we have a suite of proposals in front of you, and we'll talk about some of them in a little bit more detail moving forward. But firstly, just to recap the process, we're here now in February. This was a stakeholder engagement process that started in about April of last year, including a whole series of one-on-one meetings with developers, designers, other industry stakeholders. This was coupled with 3 thematic workshops that were really focusing on the main categories of the proposals, one of which was making it fit for Oahu, right? So what are ways that we can cut cost and make sensible amendments that don't lose on performance? Thinking about ways that we can incentivize the market and have a little bit more of a reach for some of the performance, and that's both in voluntary commercial stretch code and then something around large homes, which we'll discuss moving forward. And then lastly, just maintaining certain elements that are city law today, which include EV and PV ready for residential buildings and then EV ready for commercial buildings. And we're, again, really grateful for the leadership of the industry. We appreciate BIAH, so the Building Industry Association. They really helped coalesce a point of contact with a codes committee, which is something that they hadn't stood up before. And we've had ongoing and real deliberative discussions with their chair, Greg Thielen. And we anticipate opportunities to smooth out some of those testimonies that were received in advance of this meeting. So quickly moving into some of the high-level elements in the proposal. Really this first one is a completely voluntary commercial stretch code. And this is really about setting a North Star or a target for increased performance from the base code. And this notion of grid interactive efficient buildings is really something that Hawaiian Electric is quite interested in. There was an announcement just yesterday, I think, where they started to highlight some of the discussions around variable rates throughout the day. And buildings like this can actually perform better in that kind of situation, flexing the energy load throughout the day for different components within that building to help really capitalize on the lowest rates throughout the day. It is completely voluntary. The hope is that we could wrap around incentives to then actually motivate someone to pursue this above performance. And we're currently working with both the State Energy Office and Hawaiian Electric on a federal grant to support pursuit of tying together some of these incentives moving forward. Another component in the sort of stretching our savings category is looking at a modest set of energy performance requirements only for single-family homes greater than 4,000 square feet. And we can talk more in detail if there's specific questions on what some of these performance requirements could be. And Ben Sullivan, as the Deputy Director mentioned earlier, can provide more clarity on it. But it's really finding a way with a pretty small segment of the market that perhaps is not as price constrained to think about ways that we can bring more practice of some technologies, find ways to train the workforce, and think about leading the market for increased performance over time. And one of the big components here is that in most commercial buildings, there is an energy model which helps inform the design so that it can perform well. That's not really a common practice for residential development. That's one of the components that's proposed as a requirement so that we can really think about ways to maximize performance in these large homes. And then lastly, the last sort of suite of proposals in terms of maintaining what is currently city law, as well as finding ways to cut costs, cut the upfront cost while not losing on the energy performance. Highlighting a few things here that we're proposing to remove certain requirements for floor insulation. This was a great thing that surfaced through the local amendment process that we might have missed an opportunity had we not engaged in these discussions. Removing requirements for certain daylighting controls and removing a requirement for hot water recirculation, which can be quite expensive depending on the mechanical and electrical components in the building, and then really maintaining what is currently city law in terms of EV and PV readiness for residential development and EV readiness for commercial development. And the last thing that we wanted to really leave with here and highlight is that it's important to acknowledge two crises that we have in front of us. We have an undoubted housing crisis, but we also have climate crisis. And climate is not just the impacts that we're seeing out in community, but we're really seeing the utility impacts to people as a result of our dependence on fossil fuels. And we are learning more and hope to engage both stakeholders and council on the most significant resources ever available from the federal government to address both affordability and climate. So the Inflation Reduction Act of last year will bring competitive funds, but also direct money to the state and to the city. And we hope to capitalize that to really educate that it might, in some instances, actually be less expensive to build a higher performing building than it would absent some of these rebates and tax credits, et cetera. Not all the rules and ways to navigate the processes are available yet. We're certainly keeping tabs on that, and we want to make sure that we're bringing all the resources down to the local level as we can and support people in accessing those and maximizing these federal resources. So with that, I'll take a step back, and we're happy to answer any questions or wait if there's testimony.
Mahalo, Director. And I would also like to welcome Chair Waters, Councilmembers Cordero, Okimoto, and Dos Santos Tam, and also welcome Mayor Blangiardi in the chamber as well. Are there any questions for Director? Vice Chair Kia Aina.
Thank you for your presentation. Your last slide has $369 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act, and I think we all know that's a lot of money. Can you just remind me again, what is your office going to do to compete for any competitive funding coming through the pipeline?
So so the 369 is not money to Hawaii, right?
No,
That's the whole federal package. And
but before you continue, let me just say, it's good to throw that out, but if we're not going to get any of it, then that's just a number to me. And I, of course, have been very critical of, I think, all of Hawaii, all of the counties in the state of Hawaii, including our county, to do a better job to be able to compete for federal funding. In a recent meeting that Chair Waters and I had with Senator Schatz, he had very grave concerns over all of the counties and the governor's ability to compete for a lot of this funding that's coming down, that clearly our narrative would probably be stronger than many of the other states in competing for such funding. So your office has always been a good leader. So can you just, I guess, tell me what you guys are going to do and give me a level of confidence that we get it and we're going to go after it?
We get it and we're going to get it, right. So we would love to come back to this committee in particular to share more information. Again, a lot of the programs are not defined yet, Council Member, and we have a whole suite of resources and engagement with the State Energy Office. Related to this bill proposal, I want to make a point across the Inflation Reduction Act. There's money direct for government, there's money direct for nonprofits, there's money direct for building owners and managers, there's direct money for developers, and then there's direct money for farmers and other natural resource managers, as well as all of us as individuals and residents. So we don't have the proposal in terms of all of the programs that we will be pursuing. Some of it is formula money that will come down to us directly. So how do we make sure we're prepared with the plans to execute all of that work? Some of it will be coordinated by the State Energy Office in particular in consultation with the counties, but right now we're trying to make sure that people are aware of the things that they can directly go out for, which aren't competitive, right? They're in the sort of tax credits and rebates and other opportunities.
Okay.
So we have probably about 3 that we're keying in on, and we'd love to come back to talk with you all about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Director, I just wanted to ask whether you or Deputy Director had the chance to review the testimony submitted today.
Yes, we have.
Okay. Was there any feedback you wanted to provide now, or did you need to do additional research or?
We'll certainly do a deeper read, but across, there was a series of, support, oppose, comments. One in particular might be confusing a process that's going on at the state level right now. So we're here talking about a 2018 code. There's a state building code council that the director highlighted where they fit in the process. They're working on the 2021 code. So some of the comments from one of the testifiers, it appears to be in response to those deliberations. And we've had a chance to connect with the building industry of Hawaii, the BIAH, just last week, Friday, on their testimony from last week. And we see path forward on some of the comments as written. There's a couple that they have opposition in terms of the principle of the proposals. And then with Hawaii Gas in particular, they had a pretty extensive testimony. We've already contacted their director of sustainability, and we'll be reconnecting with them next week. It might be a misread. Codes are quite complex, and we even have been engaging with the industry that it might serve all parties if when we deliver a code at the end of the day, it actually has all of the components from the international code, the state code, and the city code. Because when you're reading some of the amendments and the proposals, it's a little bit out of context. And if you haven't perhaps gone to the provision that's just above that says if this, then this, or if this, not this, you might misinterpret. So there's some of that going on perhaps with Hawaii Gas. But we look forward to re-engaging just as we've done in preparation for the bill's introduction.
Appreciate that, Director. So it sounds like your office and yourself, and I'm assuming DPP too, are open to connecting with any stakeholders that have concerns or questions about the language in the bill.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And do you think that in terms of fleshing out those questions, providing answers, do you think a month is sufficient to do that?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, I don't have the full picture of the council proceeding calendars, but from a full council to a next committee meeting, I see paths forward.
Okay, appreciate that. Any other questions for our director? Sensing none, we'll now proceed to remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote registered testifiers for this item?
Chair, we have remote testifiers.
this one. Okay, I'll turn first to Mr. Kane from Hawaii Gas. Or Will Kane, sorry.
Yeah, it is Will Kane, Chair. Thank you. On behalf of Hawaii Gas. We'll stand on a written testimony. We support the intent. We have some proposed amendments. And I would ask that, since we submitted our testimony, OCSR has reached out, and we'd like to have some discussions about the provisions that we were asking to amend. Yeah, anyway, so we'd like to have those discussions if possible and have a little bit of time. If not, then we would request those amendments. I'm here for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Any questions for the testifier? Sensing none, next we have Howard Wigg. And thank you, Mr. Kane. I don't believe Mr. Wigg is on.
He's here in person.
In person. Can we go to him now? Okay.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Good afternoon, council members. Howard Wigg, Hawaii State Energy Office and Chair of the Hawaii Building Code Council. I have 1 minute, so I will focus on 3 items that reduce the cost of construction. Number 1, we are specifying higher efficiency lights, which means you need to buy fewer lights, fewer fixtures, and the electrician needs to install fewer fixtures. With the higher efficiency, you get the same light down on the floor for less cost. Floor R value, the chair mentioned that. We've gone from R13 to R0. We have such a mild climate, we really don't need floor insulation in our residences. So we've eliminated that. Mass walls, those are concrete walls. Instead of requiring exterior insulation, which is very expensive, we've said for commercial buildings, you have X reflectivity, just reflect the sun back out. And for the residential, ditto, just reflect the sun back out and you can eliminate the need for exterior insulation. Thank you very much.
Mahalo, Mr. Wigg. Any questions for the testifier? Sensing none, thank you. Next, we have Evan Wee.
Chair, testifier has not joined the meeting.
Okay. Stephanie Sakamoto.
The testifier has not joined the meeting.
Okay. And I believe we have Angela Young. Please proceed.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, and the committee. Angela Melody Young testifying in strong support. I think that was the energy analyst, Howard. He educated me about, he said something about China. China is going for green energy because they were previously the main emitters of CO2, but now China is not. It's the US. So I learned an interesting fact. Okay, so onto the testimony. As Hawaii progresses towards achieving its renewable energy and decarbonizing goals, energy efficiency is the most cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with electricity generation and consumption while providing financial benefits for customers. In 2008, the state partnered with the federal DOE, Department of Energy, to create Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative. And the Clean Energy Initiative was subsequently enacted as Act 155 from 2019, which codifies these energy efficiency goals. And Act 155 codifies the portfolio standards for Public Utilities Commission standards within HRS 269-96. Because the Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative and Act 155 are in alignment with the federal DOE, we are in strong support because of the strong cohesion of vision from the state, local, and county government.
Mahalo, Ms. Young.
Okay.
Thank you. Any questions for the testifier? Sensing none, I believe that's everyone we have registered. Do we have anyone standing by?
Chair, there are none.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Clerks, do we have any in-person registered testifiers for this item?
Chair, there are none.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there anyone from the public who would like to testify today? Sensing none, members, any discussion before I make my recommendation? And I'll just, for purposes of initial discussion, we do have a posted CD1 that has technical amendments, and anticipate taking a vote on that today, and then postponing to incorporate further testimony and comments from stakeholders involved to have a more substantive committee draft at the next meeting. And then, so as mentioned to Director Gonser earlier, hoping to have a committee draft at the April 5th meeting that can then be passed out and hopefully can go pretty quickly, and no further amendments will be needed after that. But any discussion? Okay, as mentioned, sensing none, hearing none, as mentioned, the chair recommends that Bill 4 be amended to the posted CD1. Any discussion or objections to that? Any reservations? Hearing none, Bill 4 is amended to the committee draft 1. And as mentioned, the chair recommends that the action on Bill 4 be postponed to the next scheduled committee meeting on Wednesday, April 5th, 2023. Any discussion, objections, reservations to that? Hearing none, so ordered. Okay. And now moving on to agenda item number 2, informational briefing update on the mayor's housing plan. I believe we have managing director present.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair Wire, Vice Chair Kiaina, Council Chair Waters, and Council members. Mike Formby, Managing Director. And I did want to note that the mayor is here supervising me today. Make sure that I'm very honest about our plan, but I'm glad he's here because the truth is, as you may see in the PowerPoint today, the mayor and I jointly co-chair the Affordable Housing Working Group that meets with all the departments that are involved in affordable housing. We sit at the head of the table and co-chair that on a bi-monthly basis. And then we have a team here with us, which I'd like to introduce to you. Obviously, the Deputy Managing Director, Krishna, and then 2 members of the Office of Housing, Eilena Laborde and Cheryl Belisario. They're both in the Office of Housing. And then we got Andy Kawano back from the Budget and Fiscal Services, and Daryl Young is back in the corner, and then here is Kat Tashner with the Department of Land Management. So they're all members of the Affordable Housing Working Group, and they're here today to answer any specific questions that you might have. So I really appreciate this opportunity to come today and talk to you about our affordable housing program and the status of our plan. So on this first slide, I just went back a little bit with history and talked about in 1997, I think you all know that the city disbanded the Department of Housing and Community Development, and it was associated with some fraud that had occurred in the department, and it was disbanded. And it wasn't until 2011 that the council moved with a charter amendment, section 6-106, to establish an Office of Housing. And that Office of Housing has an executive of housing. And if you read the charter provisions, it basically says that that executive oversees, coordinates, and directs the city's housing program. And it's really silent as to homelessness. And what happened, the reality is between 2011 and 2021, it largely became an office that focused on the rising homelessness issue and focused less on housing, as housing was handled by the Department of Community Services, the Department of Planning and Permitting. And then in 2018, when we created the Department of Land Management, the Department of Land Management assumed a very significant role in the affordable housing program. And since then, it's been that kind of siloed program where every department, there's 10 of them that come to the Affordable Housing Working Group, every department has a role, a significant role in affordable housing, but they really have to work together. So in 2021, the mayor and I, at his condominium, asked Anton Krucky to not go for the position that he wanted in the city, which he now has, the Department of Community Services. And we asked him to step into the role of the executive of the Office of Housing, and he agreed to do that. And he agreed to do that because we knew that he had the vision to start working on programs, and the first program that he stood up was the core program, and he did that working with the community. He had meetings in the mayor's conference room where he brought in different service providers, nonprofits, community experts on homelessness, and they looked at best practices on the mainland and decided to stand up our core program here to provide a continuum of care, more options for the homeless on the streets. And that's been a very successful program. And by the way, I just got a PowerPoint update, a one-year annual report on the core program. I believe it's been given to Councilmember Tyler Dos Santos Tam because they're presenting it to the Chinatown Downtown Neighborhood Board tomorrow. But we'd be happy to get that report to all of you. It has a lot of metrics and a lot of data in it for your districts by district. But Anton Krucke was the first one that came up with the concept of affordable housing as a book with many chapters. And it's a phrase that I've liked from the beginning, because the reality is you have to be working in many different areas to pull off a successful affordable housing program. You can't be focused on just housing first. You can't be focused just on the 201H policy. You can't be focused on housing vouchers. You have to actually be operating in about 10 different areas at once to have a successful program. And that's what we've been focused on. So early in 2021, we had 2 new chapters added to the book. And the first one was the private activity bond program. And I realized that we've never had an opportunity to speak to council in depth about this program, and we need to do that. And we're happy to come to each of your offices and speak with you in depth and show you material to explain the program. Today, I wanted to present a highlight of the program so you would understand, and then we'll follow up with any questions that you may have. And then the second program, which we did working with council, and I thank you very much for that, was our first bill, and that was Bill 1, the incentive to the Bill 7 program, which this council passed in 2019. So we thank you for Bill 1, and it's actually helped incentivize the program. And I'm going to focus on both of those now in more detail. So first, for the private activity bond program, Section 142 of the Internal Revenue Code allows a municipality to elect to retain their private activity bond allocation. And the city had not retained its allocation in about 22 years. So I think this was the 23rd year in 2021 when it was retained. That decision was made by the prior administration in December of 2020. So they filed it with the IRS. Once it was filed with the IRS, that's irrevocable. We have no choice but to stand up the program. And if we don't stand up the program, we lose the volume cap allocation. So had we not retained it at the municipality level, it would have gone to the state. So we had to stand up a program. And the reality was, since the program hadn't existed in 20 plus years, there were no rules, there was no handbook, there was no application, there was no criteria, and there was no staff to run this program. And it's $120 million in low interest credit that does not impair the credit liability of the city and county of Honolulu. In other words, we're what's called a conduit issuer of these tax-exempt multifamily housing bonds. We don't actually issue them on our credit. We're just a conduit for the issuance of the bonds. So if the city's volume cap in 2020 was 120 million, and it expires on December 31st of 2023, which is another reason that we had to prioritize this program. Because if we didn't get the program stood up, the applications on the street, the criteria adopted, and the staff to pick, the developments or the rehabilitation projects that were selected would be unable to close by December 31st, 2023. So we put a lot of effort into standing that program up, and we were successful. And it is for 20% of the units for tenants with incomes of 50% less, or you can have 40% with 60% or less AMI. We stood the program up in DPP under the Multifamily Rental Housing Program, and we adopted the rules as Title 20, Chapter 27. You can find them on the DPP website under Housing. Those are published. The rules became effective on February the 4th, 2022. So looking at the next page, we had to coordinate our city program with the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation. I was actually called over to the legislature to meet with the housing chairs of both the Senate and the House because they were very concerned that when the city retained its volume cap, that it would impair their ability to line up the private activity bonds with LIHTC and their revolving funds. So they have other funds that are available. And typically, when a developer wants to go forward with a project, they need multiple sources, what they call layers of funds. And so I went over and met with them and assured them that we would do our best to work with HHFDC to make sure that we coordinated with them. Not sure why the prior administration elected to retain in December of 2020, but the benefit to us is that because those are bonds for this municipality, we now have the right to say to HHFDC that given the greatest need is on this island, we would like our volume cap to go to projects on this island versus to other neighbor islands. So we do have a right now to work with HHFDC to make sure that we get priority. We're working on the memorandum with HHFDC, what that relationship will look like and what right the mayor and the council will have on city and county of Honolulu projects. We have 2 city projects that were awarded we actually awarded $135 million. We dipped into 2022. $105 million went to a project in Chinatown, an entire building in Chinatown that is going to be rehabilitated and then extend the affordability of that project for a long time. So it would have come out, potentially could have come out of affordability, could have been bought on the market and converted to market housing. Our goal is to keep those units in affordability. The second one is a project in Waipahu, and it's a rehabilitation project. Also want to rehabilitate and maintain that inventory. There is council process for the bond resolution, and that's where I think we need to get more information for you so you understand your role in this process. Go on just briefly to Bill 1, the Government Assistance Program for Bill 7. As you know, this program is a pilot project, so we needed to get Bill 1 stood up quick to incentivize the market. It provides for an economic incentive to Bill 7 projects after issuance of a certificate of occupancy, which means these are all privately financed, privately designed, permitted, and constructed projects. There's no government assistance until after they have a certificate of occupancy. They're small lots, small builds, and they're subject to Bill 7 design guidelines adopted by this council. And those design guidelines are outside the building code. So when the council adopted Bill 7, it adopted special design guidelines that allow it to basically compromise on some of the requirements of the building code so that you can reduce the per square foot cost of building a small apartment complex on a small lot. And that's the goal of this program, is to drive down the cost per square foot and to encourage builders. The people that build these units are not developers, they're lot owners. They consider themselves builders. And we've been working very closely with them to tweak the design guidelines so that they can continue to drive down the cost. And I'm encouraged to say that Governor Green on the state side has put forth a match for the city Bill 1 incentive. Initially, council appropriated $10 million for this program. Governor Green is proposing a $10 million state match under the same rules as we have. So next, I wanted to just sort of lay a framework background for how we view the affordable housing program, and this also happened in early 2021. Mayor Blangiardi, myself, and actually Chief Resilience Officer Matt Gonzer, 2 city executives, could go to New York under the Bloomberg Harvard Cities Leadership Initiative. It was a competitive program. The mayor and our team, we applied. We were picked. The mayor went up with a cohort of 40 mayors from around the world. I went up with senior leaders, also from around the world. And we had an opportunity to participate live in New York for 1 week with the head of business professionals and Harvard lawyers, planners. And then it was a 1-year program online after that. And one thing they talked about was something called wicked problem solving at the city level, at the municipality level. And those are problems that are intransient. They're complex, ever-changing. They don't go away. And they told us that there is a way to handle wicked problems. And the first is that you have to understand the problem. You really got to understand before you come up with a solution. And second, you have to innovate. You have to have cross-sector collaboration. You have to create a safe space where people sit at the table and know they can talk, they can make comments, they can contribute without feeling like somehow they don't have the knowledge to talk. and you have to take risk. And at the end of the day, if you do all those things successfully, it's a program called execution as learning. And what it means is you have plans, but the plans haven't been successful over time. So the city has had plans for affordable housing, but we actually haven't eaten away at the demand for affordable housing, which exceeds the supply of affordable housing, because those plans haven't been effective. And so we've been using this execution as learning as part of our affordable housing task force working group, which the mayor and I co-chair monthly. And we have subgroups that meet in between the working group meetings. So if we're working on a specific project, and I'll go through the projects that we're working on, those subgroups will sometimes meet once or twice a week on those specific projects. And the requirement is that every time you leave the table, you leave with homework and you come back with answers so that you move the ball. We don't get together and we just talk, and then next week we get together and talk about the same thing. We say, how are we going to get stuff done? And honestly, council members, we have learned so much through this process. The first part of this process was listening to the community. So we had developers in, they presented to us, they talked about their challenges of developing from small to large developments. We had nonprofits in, we had policy experts in on affordable housing, and we listened to people tell us what they thought the problem was and why the counties and the state could not significantly make progress on the affordable housing problem. We learned a lot from that. But then we really started to learn when we started driving execution, and we started saying, let's do this. And then we'd come across an obstacle. We'd say, wow, we didn't know that was the case. And that's what I want to talk to you about today when we get into the PowerPoint. Some of the things that we haven't had a chance to share with council, but I know you'll be interested in. For example, Chair Waters, one has to do with the affordable housing tax-exempt bonds. And there are significant limitations with tax-exempt bonds. And so I want to talk to you about that today so you can understand how we want to come to council in the new budget and look at other sources of funding that will allow us to do more creative, more development of affordable housing in ways that activate communities and allow us to do other projects. So I want to talk about that. So the list of things I want to go through real quickly, we talked about PAB. We're going to talk about our tax-exempt GO bonds. We're going to look at our FRF funds, why we elected to buy Waikiki Vista with FRF versus the $170 million affordable housing tax-exempt bonds. We're going to look at Charter Section 6106, which are the charter affordable housing funds, the 0.5%. We're going to look at development agreements that we have right now with developers on affordable housing projects. We're going to look at DCS programs, and Daryl Young is here if you need more details on that. DPP is going to, well, I'm actually going to talk about the DPP programs on affordable housing. And then we're going to talk about regional infrastructure planning and what we hope to do this year, working with council. And then our ongoing affordable housing projects, ending with just an overall commitment that we're going to better align with the state. And Mayor made that offer to Governor Ige when Governor Ige was still in office. We went over and met with Governor Ige, and he said we would like to align very closely with the state on affordable housing. We did, to the extent we could, but when Governor Green came in, he put out the carpet for us as well. He said, I want to work better with the city and county of Honolulu. So we believe there's synergy there. We really do. And right now we're waiting for the governor's emergency proclamation on affordable housing because we think that will give us opportunities as well. So real quickly on the private activity bond program, we did establish the program. We're a bond conduit. We're not an actual issuer. We're a conduit issuer. More information will be made available to council. Please ask us. Asking today, we'll meet with you one-on-one to go over this program with you. And the total allocation, which we successfully awarded, was $135 million. Our 2020 bond allocation was $120, but we did $135 million. Next, let's go to the tax-exempt GO bonds. So what I did on this one, I responded to a letter from Council Chair Waters and Councilmember Tyler Dos Santos Tam, and this is a verbatim copy of the attachment to that letter. So I hope you've had a chance to review it already. But basically what I did is I did my best to break out the current projects that we're working on that are lined up or aligned against the $170 million tax-exempt GO bonds that you gave us. And we appreciate that appropriation. So on the first page, they're city-owned properties. I think you're all aware of the Kania boxcar lot. That's a 5-acre parcel that the city has owned for a long time. The community has complained about it after the boxcar lot shut down because it was attracting homeless and they felt like it was neglected. So we're moving on developing an affordable housing complex in concert with the park and ride facility and a child care facility. Because when that property was left to the city, it had a unilateral agreement on it that we would develop a child care facility. And so that was one of the reasons that when Mayor came on board, he committed to hire a child care resource coordinator, which we did in Ted Burke. Ted works in DCS, and Ted is helping us work the child care component of this project. But we actually have architectural renderings, conceptual renderings of this project. It's slated to have 200 units. It will be an expensive project, could be as much as $150 million plus. But the goal here is to get affordable housing built in Kunia, and that would be done through a development agreement with a developer. Next, we have Harbor Arms in Pearl City. I think you all know that that was used as a quarantine facility during COVID. When it came out of that program, it had a lot of damage to it, and it had to be rehabilitated. And it's now fully occupied as an affordable housing 30-unit complex. We did go through planning and design work on that facility to see whether or not it made sense to increase capacity, to either add square footage or add a floor. And it looks like at this time that given the cost, we're going to stay with it as it is, a 30-unit complex. We have a potential development in Waiawa, and this would be near the rail station at Pearl Highlands. This would be a TOD development. We're doing a site assessment right now, looking at a massing study to see what kind of facility can be built in that topography and in that geology. D-Light Bakery was acquired by the city using affordable housing tax exempt bonds. We're looking at a TOD redevelopment of that property. And then 820 Ivalay in Ivalay is currently being used by MED while their facility is being renovated, and then after they vacate, it will be turned into affordable housing. So those projects are all in planning and design. And I believe Kat told me that DPP is very close to a new master agreement for a firm that will continue to do more planning and design for us. So that number may go up as our capacity increases because we have other properties that we need to do planning and design work on. For condemnations in process, Chair Waters came to us with 1615 Alawai. We have possession of that property. We have deposited the $3 million. That takes a while to go through condemnation. Hopefully it'll be a friendly condemnation, and we hope to develop 40 to 60 units in senior affordable housing. And then Councilmember Say has been a frequent, I don't want to say complainer because that sounds negative, but he's let us know that I think it's fair to say, because we haven't moved as quickly on that as we wanted to, that lot is a nuisance to the community, and it needs to be condemned. So we're in condemnation on that now. The real property tax assessed value of that lot is $1.125 million, and we would also use that for affordable housing. So we're moving on those two. On the next page, for rehabilitation and maintenance, we have $20 million that's set aside for Inner Road. There are 2 phases to Inner Road, phases 1 and 2. There are 33 units. That property was bought, I believe, in 2018 by the city using CDBG funds. And then we have 2 other programs there, Kauhale and Haleiwa and Kuakini low to moderate income apartments. So we're looking at rehabilitation and maintenance projects to keep those suitable for occupancy. As far as property acquisitions, these are the ones that due to confidentiality agreements with the owners of the property, I'm not able to disclose publicly the name. I think in private, one-on-one, I can have a little bit more liberality than I do publicly, but I can tell you that one is in Ivalay, and this is the one that the mayor and our team wants to do a significant TOD development. And I'm talking 750 to 1,000 affordable housing units. And it's a good-sized parcel in Ivalay. And our plan is actually to try to do a park and ride there, and also to activate that with commercial mixed-use retail and service providers for the community. And this is the one where I'll share that we're struggling with the GO tax-exempt bonds, because when we first came in January of 2021, one of the first things we were told by the CIP division in BFS was there's an issue called site control. And I'm not sure if the council members have ever heard of that issue, but it was told to us that there are limitations that what you can do using tax-exempt GO bonds because of site control. And we kept saying, well, what are you talking about? What is this site control issue, and what does it mean? And how does that impact our ability to do something like TOD development? Because we started our TOD program in 2013 when we hired Harrison Rue to be our TOD administrator. And here we are in 2023, and the city has not one major TOD development yet. We've had developers do TOD developments, but this would be a city TOD development, and we want to put a park and ride in there. So when people come to town, they don't have to park on the streets and inconvenience the people that live in the community. They have a park and ride to get on the train to go out to the Eva side. So we want a park and ride. We would hope to put a Safeway, a Longs, things of that nature in there for the community. The impact of tax-exempt GO bonds is that, one, you cannot do the commercial mixed use. So we would basically be building a tenement-type project. And we don't want to build that type of project. We want to activate the community. And then the second issue that we've come across is that if you can build a commercial component to it, that commercial component can only serve the tenants of that facility. So if we were to convince a Longs and a Safeway to go into our Evil TOD development, they could only sell to people in the complex, which makes absolutely no sense. So what we found just last week, and Christian, I think I'm at liberty to say it about the legal opinion, we just found out last week from our bond counsel, after the discussion that we've had for a protracted period of time, that site control on GO tax-exempt bonds is no longer an issue, which means we can go to a developer and we can say, we want to lease this property to you for 60 years at $1 a year. Please develop 750 to 1,000 affordable housing units contiguous with the rail station, but they are bound by the same limitations on mixed-use retail and only being able to cater to people in that complex. So we're actually going to have to go to the state legislature and ask for an amendment, a change in law, which we're going to do, because we believe that if we're going to develop a TOD community, we need to do it in a way that activates the larger community. We want people to get off the rail station in Evil to go to businesses in Evil. We want to create a community where people can live, work, and play. We don't want to create a community that is only for the people that live in affordable housing. So that's the goal here, and we'll have conversations with you one-on-one about our plan to move forward on that. But once we acquire the property, and this is potential property acquisition costs, 45 to 55 million, then we would look at an analysis of what it might cost to develop that over a 5-year period. That's the plan. For Eva Beach, the good news on Eva Beach is it already exists. It's 100 units, but it came out of affordability. So right now it can be bought on the market and it could be priced at market prices. Its affordability period is over. So we've gone to the owner of that complex and we've asked them if we can buy that from them to keep it affordable. And the affordability of those units is quite amazing. The price, I mean, I don't think you can find those kind of prices at very many places on Oahu. So we definitely want to acquire that building, keep those 100 units affordable. Lastly, we have 2 pre-offer assessments. These are facilities that we're familiar with. We've done site visits. We've actually sent an offer letter on the one in Waikiki. The one in Waikiki is very interesting. The owner of the leasehold units, there's 90 leasehold units in Waikiki that are largely Section 8. I would say out of the 90, maybe 87 are Section 8. Kat, is that right? Something like 87 of the 90 are Section 8. And the owner is in his 80s. And he's afraid that if he doesn't find somebody that wants to keep those units, Section 8, housing, that level of AMI income and rent, that they're going to be bought by someone who's going to align with the fee owner and it's going to go to market. And so what we've done is in working with this leasehold owner, he's actually come to the city and said that he would gift those 90 units to the city. But the city, we've talked to HUD about this, the city learned in the past that buying leasehold units with a fee lease that renegotiates over time is not in our best interest. So we actually sent a letter this week to the fee owner asking them if they would be interested in selling us the fee. And then we'll acquire that property and we'll keep those units Section 8 housing. And the last one is Kaka'ako. These properties, there's actually multiple properties, just came on the unit close to the rail station, and we're looking at acquiring that property as well. Any questions about the property that's lined up? And I'll be very honest, Council, whether or not those all make it by July 1st of 2023 is uncertain. We're doing our best. I can almost promise you, in fact, I can promise you that the Eva Lay Center one will not close by June 30th of 2023, because if it does, we would be using bonds that would basically marginalize our development of that property, and we don't want to do that. So we're going to ask that we go past July and work with council on a reappropriation of the right kind of bonds that allow us to do a activated TOD development. On the next page, looking at FRF funds for Waikiki Vista, I think you all know we met with council in advance. We purchased that building with 100, and I think it's actually 108, but it has 4 floors of office space or commercial space. And the reason we did not use the $170 million to buy this building, which was our first inclination, was that issue of you could not allow someone outside of affordable housing to go into those 4 floors. And our goal was to have those 4 floors available as a seat of government operations, if not for the mayor, the managing director, and the council, at least for city council while we started work on this building. Because it's our desire to rehabilitate this building, but most especially council chambers. I think you know your chambers, there's talk of them being unhealthy, the air conditioning system, the carpets, the paint, all of that. So we would like to have a discussion with council about whether or not we do the building as a whole or we phase the building, but we thought the facility over there would be a good place, given that it has an auditorium almost this size, to stand up council operations and have council located with operations as well as the mayor's office and managing director's office, if that's the will of both the administration and the council. So it preserved an opportunity for us to do that we could not have even thought about if we had used the affordable housing tax exempt GO bonds. We would have had to convert those 4 floors immediately into affordable housing. So we preserved that option for us for now, and it's a conversation that we need to have about how we phase the rehabilitation of this building, whether we do it in 1 phase, which is cheaper, or 2 phases, which is a little bit more expensive. I'd like to have that conversation with council. And then there'll be a DCS solicitation in 2023. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that coming up. But we are taking a Appendix 2 line item, $20 million for that solicitation. And that, I think, will go out sometime March or April, maybe May at the latest. Next, I want to talk about those solicitations. The Charter Section 6106 Charter Affordable Housing Funds. We did a solicitation in June of 2022. There were 2 groups. The first group was Group A. It was a construction. So these were projects that were ready to go in construction. And you can see the list of projects there and the number of units and the price that we gave, the amount that we gave to each of those developers to build those projects. And then on the next page, there's Group B. And Group B was for land acquisition. And there's 2 there. One of those projects fell out when they were able to move forward and execute, and that money is now being repurposed in the 2023 solicitation. So if you look at the 2023, we have $11 million, which includes that repurposed fund from the June of 2022. We have the $20 million SLFRF from council. Thank you for that. And then we have $9.5 million home ARP, and that, once again, is subject to council approval as well. Next page, we're looking at our development agreements. These are really public-private partnerships. Holly Vaiolo, you all know we did groundbreaking on Holly Vaiolo. That's the Michael's organization under development. In fact, I think they're already going active for leases. The next one is Aya Sugar Mill, EAH Housing, 139 units, and we're actively working with them. Kapolei Parkway, that's Kapolei lots 6 and 7, the Kobayashi Group, 401 units. We just worked with them to deregister that land from land court, which has the impact of speeding up the development of that project. So if it stayed in land court, it just requires a lot more time. So we deregistered that. We're in the deregistration process with the Kobayashi Group. Verona Village, I'm happy to report that the city went out with a development agreement with Savio and Habitat in late 2020. And that project had preconditions on it that needed to be removed before development could begin. One of the major preconditions was a determination of the boundary of the project on Renton Road. And we're 90% done with that boundary determination and about ready to go back to the developers and tell them that they can start to do their planning and design work for that project. That's 140 actual homes, not condominiums, homes. And then there's the Westlock Affordable Rental Housing by Stanford Carr, 127 units. For Department of Community Services, I won't go through these because I think most of you are familiar with their housing voucher program and the increments that they have, and I put the funding levels that are in there. And then there's project-based vouchers that are listed there for you to review. And if you have any questions on those housing vouchers, Daryl Young can come up and talk about those. For the Department of Planning and Permitting, their affordable housing programs, we all know they have a 201H program and the Bill 7, Bill 1 incentive program. There have been 6 Bill 7 projects permitted to date, and there's 40 in the pipeline. And what we've been doing is working with the builders and working with the DPP staff to clarify the design guidelines. And once again, the goal is to reduce the cost of development per square foot. So we're working with them to see how much further we can go to maybe reduce things that they have to do that drive up construction costs. And just yesterday, talking to Ernie Lau at the Board of Water Supply, we reached an agreement with Board of Water Supply on a give that they're going to give for the Bill 7 program that reduces the cost. And that's what we're doing. We're working through different departments, seeing how they can allow us to move forward on these projects. We do have one project that received the certificate of occupancy and the Bill 1 incentive, and there's other projects that are in construction. DPP is also prioritizing and facilitating the processing of affordable housing projects. So on a almost daily basis, but definitely weekly basis, we get emails from developers asking us to contact DPP and help them figure out where their project is and how they can move it along. And I have to say that Director Dawn Apuna Takauchi and Deputy Director Jiro Samato have been absolutely excellent in that respect. I mean, they're right on the emails, and they're calling back the developers and working with them, the builders, working with them on these projects to help them get them through the permitting process. So it's working very well. And we just stood up an affordable housing task force, which are members of the community, the builder, the expediter, the permitting community, to work with them on how we can improve this process. And they also, by the way, stood up a solar task force working with the solar industry. So we have 2 task forces underway right now. Number 8, regional infrastructure planning. So I think many of you may know that the city currently partners with HHFDC on a TOD council that the state looks at infrastructure needs, and they consider the needs of the city as well. But when I read that document, it's basically looking at state properties. And then it wants to know what city properties might have as far as an impact on state properties. But that study is really state-owned properties. And what we're going to be proposing to council in the budget is that we do 3 regional infrastructure projects where we talk about our properties. Our properties in West Oahu, our properties in the Halaba area, and our properties in Iwalei. And we talk about what it's going to take for us to bring those projects online. And we want to do scalable regional infrastructure planning, which means, and I'm even talking about Board of Water Supply, where we say if we were to develop 500 units by 2025, what infrastructure would be required, what utilities would be required, and we program for that. If we develop 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, talking Aloha Stadium, they talk big numbers, what would it take, and would our current CIP plan for E&V, which we do have a plan to improve capacity, would we be able to provide what level of units in those regions? And so we want to make sure the city is ready to move forward on our affordable housing infrastructure. And then the last one on page 9, projects, ongoing projects. Hawaii Resource Center has been a subject of much discussion. I think you know this building was bought using affordable housing tax exempt GO bonds by the prior administration. And that issue of site control, until now, last week, where we learned for the first time that we can actually lease that building out to a developer, site control kept the city from being able to lease that facility out. The original intent of the city was to build the commercial kitchen to incentivize River of Life to move out of Chinatown to Evalay and to cater to a largeless homeless community. And we now know, even though we've got relief on the site control side, that because that building was bought with tax-exempt GO bonds, you cannot use that beautiful commercial kitchen to produce meals for anybody outside that building. And there's only 27 units in that building. So we're working on that problem. And we're actually having discussions with the state about them possibly making use of that facility. But that's just an example of, through this execution as learning process, we have learned so much that we did not know before. And it's going to empower all of us, I think, to put the city in a position to do bigger and better things for our constituency. Westlock Modular, 57 units. It's now fully managed and rented. And then Mohala Mai, you might have heard about that. Went through a rehabilitation. Mohala Mai has a groundbreaking next Tuesday. If any of you are available, I think you should join us. Mohala Mai is a building that has worked with the Women's Prisoner Project to be a building for that constituency, where they need supportive wraparound services. They need to be among others who have been through the experiences that they have been through. So it's a Women's Prisoner Project building, Mohala Mai, under DLM, and DLM worked with the management of that company to get that project up and online. The last one, better alignment with the state. It's a commitment that the mayor made to the governor. We've all made to the governor. And the last one I'd just like to go through real quickly, and then we'll answer any questions you might have. Issues, concerns, and ongoing challenges. For the private activity bonds, we have to work with HHFDC. We have two projects right now, Kapolei lots 6 and 7, and the other one is Jack Hall, Waipahu, that need additional credit from HHFDC. So they're in a situation to say to us, well, you've got your $120 million allocation. Are you going to work with us if you want us to support your projects? And so there's incentive for us to work with them, but we want to work with them on a basis that is fair to our constituency as well. So we're working out a memorandum of understanding with HHFDC on what our input will be and what right we have to say about where those funds go. It's also a timing issue. So these developers know that they have to get credit within a certain time frame to make their development schedule. The city's 201H policy, you know, the city's policy is different than the state policy. So we get a lot of input, much of it unsolicited, from the community about why does the city have a different policy from the state. When we come to the city, DPP says you're not eligible for our program. Then we go to HHFDC. They adopt it under their rules. They come back here and they get the same exemptions and waivers. And a lot of people question why our policies are different. And we would like to have a discussion about the pros and cons of that. And is there a reason that our policies are different? And if they're not, we would like to work with council on coming up with policies that make sense. We haven't arrived at any conclusions yet, but we're having that conversation. On inclusionary zoning policy, this is an issue that's also come to us from the community. So we have AMI qualifications for people to be able to rent and buy these restricted units. For the people that buy those restricted units, some of them meet the affordability, the income eligibility requirement literally by $1,000. And if that project was to go up $1,000 more, they would not be eligible. So they buy the project, they get into the project, and then the reserves go up. The state raises the reserves that are required for condominiums, and the common area maintenance fees go up. And now they're in a situation where they're housing burdened, not because of the AMI, not because of the mortgage, which we were able to limit, but because of the things that we couldn't control, which was common area maintenance and the reserves. And so they're now saying we're in a situation where we're house poor, but not because of city policies, because of things that the city can't control. And our sort of question to council and to ourselves is, what can we do to work better with the community on that very real issue? So we want to have a discussion about that. Management oversight of restricted rentals and affordable housing fee purchases. Right now, that's done in DPP, but the truth is, as we develop more projects, we're going to have to dedicate more people to working with the community that rent and own these units. They have to be monitored. You want to make sure that they stay in inventory for locals. You want to make sure that the people that are renting are AMI eligible, and it takes oversight. Alternative funding mechanisms. We want to look at tax increment financing as a value capture mechanism. We want to have a discussion with council about a different kind of bond that allows us to do TOD developments that activate a community and allow us to move more quickly with development. And we want to look at community facilities districts again as an independent taxing district. I had the discussion already about limitation on affordable housing development. I'm happy to talk to any council member one-on-one about that further. Last page, issues, concerns, and ongoing challenges. We need an exhaustive inventory of all affordable housing on Oahu. And that means not just city-owned, state-owned, city-owned, privately owned. And we need to know when that inventory comes out of affordability so that we have opportunities to acquire it and to keep it affordable. We have a contract with UHERO. They're actually going to build that inventory base for us. Last one, regulatory burden on the cost of affordable housing. There was an article that came out in 2021 that talked about Hawaii County having the highest regulatory burden, I think, of any municipality, any county in the nation. But it didn't speak to Oahu. So working with Hawaii Community Foundation, we also have a contract with UHERO to go in and to analyze our regulatory burden, which means everything from shipping, supplies, labor, to DPP, the cost of getting a permit, the time that it takes to do that, to SHPD, everything that it takes for a landowner or a developer to get a project and build. What is the burden on them doing that? Because we all know that it adds to the cost of the development. So that's our presentation. On the last page, Steve, can you go to that last page? Steve? Oh, thank you. You're ahead of me. I wanted to thank you, and I wanted to tell you that we appreciate that collaborative work with council on behalf of our constituents. We're looking to make systemic change when it comes to the city's role in affordable housing. There is an affordable housing strategy. It was done after many years of work by the prior administration, and I have to give them credit for this. They started in 2013 when Harrison Rue was hired. They got all the way to 2015 when they published a draft, but they never put it out as a final. And then they amended it in 2016 and 2017, and there's some other amendments in 2018. It's a good affordable housing strategy that was never published as a final document. We're updating it now, and then we're using it as the foundation from which we do execution as learning beyond this. The private activity bonds are not in here. The Bill 1 incentive program is not in here. The TOD tax exempt bonds, none of that is in here. So what we're trying to do is to get this document to a place where we're all pushing the boundary of the current plan and strategy. Bill 1 does exist. I apologize, we haven't shared this with you yet. We're working to get this out to you as quickly as possible so at least you'll know what the prior administration worked on for 4+ years. We want to get this out as our foundation, and then we want to move forward working with council. So unless the mayor, do you have any comments you want to add to this? Thank you, council, for your time.
Chair Wire, members of the council, thank you. You know, Michael, I continue to be impressed with your knowledge, and that was an excellent overview. I just want to give you just a brief context. Look, we came into office understanding we had an affordable housing crisis. So the first rule was, when we got together, was to try to clearly define the role of the city, you know, when it came to housing. What was their role? The second thing we wanted to do was to understand the problems that had plagued the city over the last 50 years prior, and what was getting in the way from creating that housing. Then the third thing was, what are we going to do about it? And what Mike just shared with you today is the beginning of what we're doing about it. But I think we've come to a whole different level of awareness, as Mike has talked several times today about our strategy on execution as learning, and the fact that there is no blueprint. It's requiring some innovation. We're going to draw back and draw down on the things that have been done well. We don't have to reinvent everything. There's no ego here. We just had to try to figure out, if we're in this housing crisis, we've had a lot of people before me in this role, why are things the way they are? And in order to understand that, that took some time. We did a lot of deep dives. And the fact that he mentioned the Affordable Housing Working Group, in this city, in order to have that, there's 10 departments that touch housing. And to get that kind of collaboration and understanding and bring those folks together and keep us at a table in a constructive manner, I don't know what's going on before us, but I know for a fact it's having a really strong effect on our ability to start to put this stuff down. So for me, this is just the beginning. It's not like we've been remiss, delayed, or haven't done anything. We wanted to get a real foundation put together so we could go forward into the future and make systemic changes, as Mike said, way beyond my time as mayor. What we're offering to do and what we hope we're going to get done is maybe change the trajectory of where things were going, why they didn't happen, and facilitating how they can happen. So that's all I want to say today, other than one other thing. Mike alluded to the cooperation with the state. You know, I had a great respect for Governor Ige. And in my time with Governor Ige over 2 years, I would tell you probably a year and a half of that was almost nothing but COVID. Now, since Governor Green's been in office, we talked multiple times, if not a day, even a week. And I can tell you that a lot of things are going to be forthcoming in this collaboration with the state that are also unprecedented. And that's how we like to work. We want to work with the council the same way, okay? Because it takes all of us. We're all in this together. And I really appreciate this moment. I want to thank Mike Formby again. I have the greatest respect for Mike, his thinking, and what you just shared with you up there didn't happen overnight. There's tremendous thought that went into that. Thank you.
Mahalo for that, Mayor, and mahalo, Managing Director, and for bringing the whole team down here. I appreciate that. So I'll ask if there's any questions. Floor Leader Cordero.
Thank you, Chair Wire, for having this on the agenda. Managing Director, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to start off with a few questions. First off, just going back to our city charter and the Affordable Housing Fund, and we know that the minimum, as we talk about in the last two budget cycles, is about around 37 million, right? And so I'm relating this back, relating this to the 120 million in private activity bonds and spending it down by December, I don't know, I don't have it in front of me, December something 2023 this year. And 37 million, are we able to even spend down the minimum that we have for affordable housing funds by city charter?
So, Councilmember Cordero, the first solicitation that we did in 2022 basically exhausted the charter's Section 6-106 fund at that time, except that one of the projects fell out. And now we're taking that money and we're putting it into the money that's built up since the last solicitation to do another solicitation in 2023. So our goal is there will be no money left in the charter fund. As far as the tax-exempt GO bonds, the date for that it lapses is June 30th of 2023. And I also should tell council this so that just full disclosure, when that money gets appropriated by the council, it does not get bonded. So there's not $170 million in bonds sitting in our bank drawing interest, because when we entered office, there was a surplus. And so we're still spending down the surplus that existed when we came into office. That is a very meaningful number for us on paper. We would love to be able to use all 170 million by June 30th of 2023. That's our goal. I don't think the TOD development, there's any way that can happen. Because if it did, if that 55, let's say that's 55 million, if that 55 million happened, it means we're severely limited in what a TOD development would look like. And it might drop down to something like 200 units, have no mixed-use commercial. There'd be no reason for anybody on the rail system to get off at Eva Lay and go to that property to do something unless you lived in one of those units. And we're determined, after all the years we've spent on TOD development and TOD plans, to do something iconic in Eva Lay. We do not believe that community, I'm going to say this because it's what we hear, we do not believe that community should be a dumping ground for the most vulnerable and the people who feel like they need wraparound services. That community has much more to offer. So we think with a park and ride, with a properly developed transit-oriented development community, We're just going to need help from council to do that. So we're not going to use all 170, council member, but we're going to use every dollar we can, and we're committed to that.
I do want to comment on the just Eva Lay and just about, we see every time we have storms that the transformers often are getting flooded, and the infrastructure is something that when we have HHFDC meetings is brought up very often. So, I mean, coupled with the proposals for park and ride and what have you in that area to shore it up, I think a lot of the funding will be for infrastructure. That was a side comment, but okay, going back to the private activity bonds and relating it to projects, do you anticipate the projects that you have lined up to be under the program do you know how much that might be? Would it be just under 120 million, or do you think we can get to the 120 million? Is it 120?
So Councilmember Cordero, I feel very confident about the planning and design funds and the 20 million for rehabilitation and maintenance. I feel very optimistic about the Eva Beach acquisition, although it's a very tight timeline to acquire that property. I am not quite as optimistic about the bottom two, the pre-offer assessments, simply because the Waikiki one, we just put the offer out to the fee owner after we got the leasehold interest offered to the city and county. And the Kaka'ako property just came on the market. So what I want to say is that for this type of funding, for those projects, it's perfect funding. It's except for the TOD development. For the Eva Beach one, it's already an affordable housing complex. It's 100 units. It's perfect to use tax-exempt GO bonds to buy that complex. It's just getting it through due diligence, which Kat Tashner and her team at DLM, they go through that process, and those are the subgroup meetings that we have in our conference room. Once we put an offer and we enter into a due diligence agreement with the seller, we meet weekly in the conference room and go through all the items that have to be ticked off before we can buy that property and negotiate a fair price. And I appreciate you bringing up the TOD development in Eva Lay, because that would be a redevelopment of that property. And there are infrastructure concerns with flooding and low-lying areas. And those are things that we have to go in with eyes open, understand the risk to the city, be willing to take that on to be able to do something iconic in that community.
So on the line of TOD redevelopment, I just found out just last week I still have the most rail stations. Not that I was trying to get rid of any, but I still have the most rail stations. And is the city administration being proactive in looking at any other locations that may not yet be city properties along the rail line?
So, Councilmember, yes, we are, and we do have other parcels. We do have one in Pearl City, contiguous to the rail station, and we're currently working on concepts what that might look like. But yes, we're looking at any all opportunities to acquire. And in response to that question, I'd like to share how we think about this, because the truth is, if you're buying land and you're developing, you're talking about a lengthy process. So our constituency is not going to have units that they can live in for probably 3 to 5 years. So it's a little consolation to them when we do some of this big dollar stuff, because they have immediate needs. So what we try to do is we try to balance. And the other thing is we have to do the timing of the private activity bonds, because a development like the TOD development in Eva Lay would absolutely need private activity bonds and additional layering. And one of the issues that I put in the back that I think the city council and the administration could have a discussion on is, should we offer additional layers of funding to developers? Should we have a city revolving fund? Right now we have a right under the state program to opt for revolving funds for a region, but why don't we have our own revolving fund at the city level so we can start layering our projects and say to our constituency, we're going to start jump-starting these projects in development. We'd like to have that conversation with council. But what I'm saying is we do land acquisition knowing that's 3 to 5 years out, maybe longer. We do buy units that are already in affordable housing but are coming off the market. We do buildings that we know are going to come off the market in 10 to 15 years that need to be rehabilitated to keep them occupied. So we try to find a mix so that we're dealing with near-term needs, midterm needs, and long-term needs.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question. One last question before I can turn it. I would like to turn it over. So of course, Harbor Arms, Hui, Kauhale, Halaba View 2, Halawaliko, Highlands. Those are all in my district, and of course they're all at different price points, or not price points, but like AMI points and different communities that we're looking to serve. So among all the projects and the funds that have come up, basically what are the basic goals to meet the needs of different AMIs?
Council member, I would like to ask Darrell Young to come up and speak to that, since most of the projects that you talked about are projects that they're working on. But the reality is, I'm just addressing my opinion and my thought process that I go through as I meet with community members. I personally believe that the most vulnerable have a compelling need. So we're talking 30% AMI, 50% AMI, got it. We amended our Section 6-106 charter to go up to 60% AMI. We amended that because projects had a hard time penciling out at 50% AMI and below. And that's the reality. And what I've come to learn and appreciate over time is that if you're not talking to the development community about what they can do to make a project pencil out, and you're adopting policies that don't work for them or don't work generally across the board at a level that's going to solve our affordable housing problem at the city and county of Honolulu, then I think we're not doing the most we can for our community. So what I believe is that if we get into that gap group, which the state 201H program does, you allow a mixed use, and I think those communities are actually healthier communities where you have a mixed use of constituency, and you allow the people that pay more for the units to help develop the complex, and it allows families to move up. And what we see far too often is we see a family that qualifies for a one-bedroom house, AMI limitations, with 4 kids. 4 kids and 2 parents living in a one-bedroom house. They would like to move up once they develop equity in that smaller property if we're building gap houses that they can move up in as people move up. And that's the concept, is as we develop equity. I bought in 1987 when I moved here. My father told me I was stupid and dumb, but I developed equity and I've moved up. Our constituents can do that too. So I personally think I understand the need at 30% AMI, 50% AMI, 60, but I believe we need to have a fuller vision about how the system works. And listening to the development community, they'll tell you that you need to give them more latitude to build in a broader base of AMI. I'm not sure that's the right answer. That's where I'm at. I'd like to have that conversation with council.
That actually makes sense, and I understand that, but that is a main question that, like at the Salt Lake Neighborhood Boards, like how many units are you building at this percent AMI, at this percent AMI, at this percent AMI? And, but that was a great response to bring back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And do you want to hear from Darrell Young? He can talk more about those projects. Darrell?
Just, how fast can you get them up? No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Councilmember Darrell Young, Administrator, Civil Community-Based Development Division. As we shared yesterday, we do have approximately $11 million in the Affordable Housing Fund ready to be solicited. That's at 60% AMI for 60 years. The council generously gave us $20 million in SLFRF funds that we're working on a loan product at 60% for 20 years. That's the requirement on 20 years would be the loan. The 60% affordability would remain mirrored to the Affordable Housing Fund. And then thank you for passing out Resolution 2330. That's the Home ARP program. Again, that's targeted at people who are homeless, at risk of homeless, domestic violence survivors and victims, and elderly. If we place the money all into one project, then the AMI will go up to 60%. If you spread it out, it's going to be 30%, but then you have to have comparable subsidies to offset the 30% rents. So just to give you a perspective, council is funding approximately 300 Housing First vouchers for us. That's at the 30% AMI and below limit. That investment by the council is nearly $5 million for 300 vouchers. So that's kind of your, what you're looking at, about 2.4 per program, per 100 vouchers.
Okay, thank you. And are there any other projects that, okay, you know what? I'll just defer to everyone else because I asked a bunch of questions, sorry.
Those projects could be eligible to bid.
You sure? Okay. Okay. Mahalo. So it's 401. I know Councilmember Dos Santos Tam. Vice Chair, you had questions after. And then anyone else?
Thank you. I have sort of two lines of questions. The first deals with something which you, Managing Director, just said, which I really appreciate, which is how can the city layer other funding to help these projects go? So I have two questions about that. The first is, all around the country, there are low-income and income-restricted projects that apply for federal funding from HUD, whether that's LIHTC, home funds, tax-exempt bond financing. And as part of this funding, and locally, our affordable housing developers have expressed that they have difficulty accessing these funds and matching them to city projects because of an issue with HUD's restrictive covenant language and the city's not being willing to subordinate itself to HUD's requirements. Is this something that you're evaluating? And is there something we as the council can do to help move this along? Because we want to help them get as much federal funding as they can and help get that very low interest financing that's available, especially with the way interest rates are right now.
Yeah, Councilmember Dos Santos Tam, we've just started having that discussion. The issue came to us from the development community. So we have an open email exchange with developers where they alert us to these issues, and that's one that we're having. So I'm happy to work with you or any other council member on areas that you would like the administration to push and try to see if we can achieve new levels, new sources of funding. Happy to do that.
Good. I think another, I'm glad to hear that. Another area that I'd like to ask about is Bill 1, and I'm sure my colleagues have some questions about Bill 1 thus far. But, one of the issues that the development community's expressed is that, they get this money after the fact, and so they can't build it into their pro forma. They still need to finance the total amount of the project, and then they get this amount at the end, and they need to do the pro forma at a higher rent because they don't have this money up front, and this money doesn't go back. And so one thing that I'd like to explore is perhaps a zero interest loan situation that's forgivable at the end. So that way the developers get this money up front. If they don't comply, they have to pay for it. But if they do comply, it's the exact same thing as the city giving it at the end of the process, except now they don't have to finance that chunk. And that's something I'd like to explore. And see if we can implement that. And I hope if the folks from the state are listening, maybe that's something they can also match in the same way that they're matching the grants. So that we have two options here.
Thank you, Council Member. I'm happy to have that discussion with you, and I do have additional information that I can share with you about other alternatives for the Bill 1 program.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And then I have two questions relating to sort of the efficiency of using this funding, and this relates to some things that came up on the slides. And on slide 11, and talking about the charter mandated affordable housing funds, some of these projects, in talking with the developers, have expressed the city is still charging the park dedication fees, sewer fees, water fees, to the tune of, in one case, up to $1.5 million. So, they're getting $4 million from the county in terms of affordable housing funds, but $1.5 million that's going to turn back around to go to the city. So we're really taking affordable housing funds and giving it to BWS and giving it to parks, which is fine. I'm sure they have good uses for it, but it seems to subvert the purpose of these funds. So what can we do to make sure that these funds actually go to housing and not to cross-subsidizing another department?
Council Member, I appreciate that question. We're having the same discussion with the developer. We're looking for a workaround. The problem arises because they did not go through the 201H process. I understand that, and I understand why they did not go through the 201H process. But under the law, it doesn't give them the exemption that they need. Logically, when you look at it, The fact that we gave them 3.9, I think it's $3.9 million, and then said, and oh, by the way, you owe us 1.2 back for park dedication, is insanity. So we're looking for a way around it, but we're trying to operate within the bounds of the law. The attorneys at Corporation Counsel are working on that, but maybe there needs to be some sort of other systemic change that we don't find ourselves in the same situation in the future, because it doesn't make any sense.
Agreed. I think that, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And final one, you mentioned for the Kunia boxcar lot, I don't know if I heard it right. Was that $150 million is the anticipated cost when we actually go out to build this?
So potentially what we do is we just look at foreseeable range. But for a ground up planning, design, construction, childcare facility, potentially.
And so at 200 units, that's $750,000 a unit, and the city already owns the land. I mean, at this rate, not to be facetious, but can't we just buy all these people a house in Hope Healy and just call it a day?
Yeah, it's a great question. I understand it. We're looking at that. But the truth is, developing puts the city in the same situation that the developer's in, and that is the cost of development per square foot is very high. So it's the reality that we confront. And I've talked to people about the kind of alternatives that you've talked about, and the only difference is that hopefully we're building infrastructure that is sustainable over many, many years for future generations versus just taking care of individual families. But I understand the logic of what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's, of course, to be a little facetious here, but I think the point is, we need to look at how efficiently we're spending this money. And, I understand the impulse to have our own facility, but, if we can partner with the private sector where the city subsidy is a lot lower, but we can still achieve 60 or 90 or perpetuity in terms of making it affordable, I think that's something that we should definitely be exploring as well to make sure we're using these funds in the most efficient way possible.
Thank you, Council Member. Agree with you.
Thank you. Just real quickly, Vice Chair. So regarding the Kunia boxcar lot, so that amount we're talking about, that's just for the housing, or that'd be for the school, for the park and ride, for the whole project?
So Committee Chair, I'd like to ask Kat Tashner to come up and answer that. She's infinitely more conversive on this topic than I am, and I might be off on the number, and if I am, I want Kat to correct me.
Okay, apologies, Vice Chair. We'll come back to you right after.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So we've been working with a consultant that put together a financial pro forma for the Royal Kunia boxcar site. It estimated between 120 to 129 million when you factor in bond financing and all of that. So that's the range.
And just what does that entail? That entails housing, the school.
Oh, sorry, that was the question.
Ride?
That's right. It's inclusive of the child care facility.
Mahalo, Vice Chair.
Thank you so much. Managing Director, thank you for your very comprehensive overview. It was actually very dizzying for me, and I mean that with affection, because very often people say that I make them dizzy because it's so much information. So anyway, I just want to let you know what I mean it with affection, because it was a lot of information. And so at the end of your briefing, you and I talked about it before, so I'm excited that you, Hero, will be undertaking some tasks. So on the inventory for the properties, I just want to make sure, in addition to county and state, it would also include private, correct?
That's correct.
And would it also include current and potential sites?
So that's our plan. I mean, we write the scope of work for the project, so we can make it whatever we want it to be. But I'll confirm that
yes.
Is.
So because this is, now that you're moving forward, I think it's good to have the appropriate parameters so that we get the results that we want. We want to see the current inventory, but the potential inventory, so that all of us collectively, the city and the state and private developers, would have an inkling of perhaps future properties. So I just wanted to clarify that. On the regulatory burden part, I actually don't like the word burden, because very often I think we might mislead people to think that it's bad. We have regulations in place for a reason, whether at any level of government. So, and And so first I want to make sure that it's at the local, state, and federal level. All three levels of government. And so my preference is to use the word costs, regulatory costs or impacts to affordable housing, because we have regulation in place for a reason. Because normally when you see burden, it's almost as if we're going to abolish all of the burden, right? And so I just wanted to say that, because I think that realistically, we're not going to be able to unravel all of these regulations. We need to be strategic on what we believe is overly burdensome. So I just wanted to make that point. Most of the projects.
Can I just make a comment on that?
Yes.
So I appreciate the suggestion of regulatory cost. The regulatory burden came from the article that was published nationally about Hawaii County, and we're happy to change that. I did also want to let you know, but as you mentioned it, that what we have learned from other jurisdictions and from our own process here is that over time, as housing grew from what was built in the 1950s and 60s, the walk-ups to the highs, we kept adding regulations on top of regulations.
That's correct.
And we're now in the process of retaining a regulatory expert in DPP to come in and to look at our code and see where we can eliminate, without affecting public health and safety, the regulatory cost of doing business. So
thank you.
I didn't mention that earlier, but
thank you for that sensitivity. And I can see where you're coming from, because some probably need to be streamlined. So thank you for that. Most of the projects, of course, are in other members' districts, and it's because of the availability and the allowing for density. In my district, we have a couple of projects which you have mentioned, mostly smaller, in Kailua, availing themselves of Bill 7 and Bill 1. Kaneohe, I'm expecting Kamehameha Schools, because they have a lot of land there, to be able to, they're going to move projects forward, likely to a 1H projects. And then, of course, Waimanalo is very unique. So I just wanted to highlight two issues. While there is a lot of state nexus, I still wanted to let you know my needs, because I'm a little different from the other districts. First, I've identified 10 acres of residential city land in Kailua, which I have already discussed, that would be conducive for an exchange with DHHL lands, so we can put 30 to 40 single-family homes, Hawaiian families, in Kailua. And I've heard people say, well, the land exchange process is so burdensome, and that's how we never get out of the gate. We think too much without moving something forward. I believe that DHHL is a better entity to build on that, because that would be in perpetuity for Native Hawaiian families. I think a city project ran into problems before, so I just want to make sure that that stays a priority for the administration, because DHHL could probably give the city land that it needs in industrial areas. The last one regarding Waimanalo, while both entities are state, I wanted to just highlight it to you because it could increase the availability of housing for the people of Waimanalo, especially our Hawaiian homeland beneficiaries. And that is that the fact that the majority of lands in Waimanalo are DLNR lands, agricultural lands. Nearly 30% of all DHHL lands are conservation. And the legislature has passed a law to provide that DLNR divest itself of agricultural lands, because they are a conservation agency, and give it to the Department of Agriculture. I believe that we should exchange the lands, all the agricultural lands in Waimanalo, for the Department of Hawaiian Homeland, so we can have Native Hawaiian families. Many of these properties have houses, so it increases the inventory of the Hawaiian Homelands Trust, and then DLNR will get conservation lands. The mountain slopes of Waimanalo are Hawaiian homelands. How are they supposed to build homes on the mountain? That is how the federal government treated Hawaiian homeland beneficiaries. They They give us all of the lands that they didn't want. And we need to shift the manner of how we treat Hawaiian homeland beneficiaries. The state of Hawaii has $600 million that they're providing for. That's just an inkling of how to make a dent in the program. We collectively, the city, state, and federal government, need to kokua our Hawaiian Homelands program, and I just feel that it would help in increasing the inventory of homes available for people in Waimanalo. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Councilmember, thank you for that opportunity. And if possible, I would like to meet with you and some of my staff to get more information. We have had a discussion with DHHL about the 10-acre parcel. As you know, we did a land exchange for the rail. Still in process with Department of Interior, but I'm happy to have that discussion. But I would like to follow up with you, bring staff, and get more information from you.
And I would say this, with regard to the Department of Interior's approval, you would have no better secretary to expedite an approval than Secretary Holland.
Yeah.
And so for me, I don't know what the holdup is. I heard there was interest in potentially buying the land to move it forward, but that doesn't make any sense to me. So whatever we could do, I'm just looking for little pockets of areas that I can help to increase the housing supply for my district. And again, I feel like I'm a little different from the rest of the districts. I care about big picture for everyone else, but I just wanted to articulate for you what's going on in my district.
Thank you.
Councilmember Say.
Yes, thank you very much, Managing Director Formby. I have a couple thoughts right now. The first one would be, why can't we develop, not we, but the county have a developer develop a lease to buy within the confines of what our appropriation is for a major housing project?
So, Councilmember Say, are you looking for an answer? I'll take that up.
Just take it up later, yeah.
Yeah, I need to talk to Corporation Counsel about that because I thought there was a legal issue with that, but I'd like to confirm it.
Well, the
Like
state
to
has
see.
a couple of projects that was leased or rent to buy
Yeah.
after a 30-year term.
I think it's a great idea. I'm happy to follow up on it.
The next question is, and you correct me if I'm right or wrong, developers have said for most of our projects today, it averages about $450 to $500 a square foot.
I heard that like 6 months ago, and I think the number has gone up since then.
The question would be, can you sharpen your pencil to bring it down to maybe 400 a square foot to lower the cost of a particular unit to address your 60% AMI? And the second thought would be, as far as trying to find some savings, it would be the construction costs and maybe the decrease of the square footage of the unit. What's the means, or what's the average one-bedroom unit, the square footage? Can we decrease it a little to cut the cost per unit? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, council members Say, I know for the Bill 7 program, the target cost per square foot is $250. And we've been pushing that, especially with interest rates, supply chain issues. The costs have been going up. It's very hard for the builders of those small projects on small lots to get any profit out of that. Most of them look at it as an annuity for their children and their grandchildren for years to come.
See, and that's where we're losing the optics with the general public at large. Like earlier you stated, or Chair Wire stated, what is affordable? That's where we're losing out on the battle as far as the PR, the optics.
And council member, Deputy Managing Director and I had breakfast with developers that shared this concept of smaller square footage versus AMI restrictions through a 201H program.
Right.
There's a lot of developers that believe that. They believe that investors and outside interest will not buy in smaller square footage units, and that's how we actually cater to the local residents. and we're studying that as well.
Okay, and then a couple more. I brought it up 2 years ago, but I'll be very honest and candid publicly here. Anytime the city and the state puts in infrastructure, I believe we should get some credit from the private landowners that are abutting these infrastructures. Does it make sense?
So, council member, I think that's a discussion that we have, and it's what that shared investment would be to the developers at the square footage that they're looking at developing, the cost per square footage. They find the cost of infrastructure to put them over the top, and there'd be no development. So we are trying to find that sweet spot.
Okay.
And that's why we're looking at other sources of value capture that actually spread it among the community, like tax increment financing
TIF,
in a community's facility district.
And finally, this is the one that really gets me thinking, Chair Wire, and this thinking is about, wow, what's happening in Council Member District Dos Santos 10? Business buildings are being converted to residential. That's great, but how do you finance it, and if it is going to be affordable or not, the conversion? And that's the kind of discussion we're having, which I really enjoy. So there's two projects. One was already converted. Now there's another one that was bought and being converted. My point is, we have to think like how these guys are thinking. If we were to buy that building and retrofit it for housing, and we determine that it's going to be at $350 a square foot, let's have the discussion. But I don't know how that particular developer is going to pencil it out that it's going to be affordable. Because every unit will have to be retrofitted with water, sewer, etc. But I just bring this up because it's just fascinating. So in closing, the only reason why I brought this one up is because I am scared, the managing director, scared to the point that we are losing our white collar workers when you see these type of business buildings being converted. Are we losing these type of jobs, professional jobs? And I think this kind of a discussion is needed publicly, that we are trying our best in trying to address the out-migration of our professionals also. So I share this with you because, yes, thank you very much for a job well done in your presentation. Thank you very much for sharing with us what the housing plan is all about. And you've got my 100% backing when I did tell Mr. Scott Hayashi 2 years ago on the first budget. He had his 7 or 8 projects. I want it done by 2023. And you have 2 or 3 of them in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, council member.
Thank you. I'll go to Chair Water, Councilor Okimoto, and then if you have, okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for this very informative presentation. Obviously, you and the mayor have been working really hard, and we appreciate that. I also appreciate the theory of execution as learning. I'm thinking of putting it another way, that's learn as you go. But that's kind of what we're doing too on this side of the bar, and I appreciate that. And it's really exciting to know that there's so many things in the hopper coming down the pipe. And I really appreciate the fact that you and the mayor are rolling up your sleeves and doing the work yourself. But at the same time, I'd like to ask, just looking at section 6-106 in the charter, there shall be an office of housing headed by an executive for housing who shall be appointed and may be removed by the mayor, and shall have at a minimum 3 years experience in administration of affordable housing programs or projects or programs for low-income, homeless, or special needs populations. I think this could be that's why I started off with my appreciation of you and the mayor doing it, but can we hire someone to help you who has experience already? And I know you mentioned in your presentation, or I read it somewhere, about Craig Watase, who does this for a living too. So I think that's great that we're seeking advice of affordable housing advocates and builders. But do we have someone in mind as the Office of Housing Executive?
So Chair Waters, I appreciate that question. I put Craig Harai in there because I wanted to tell you that originally when we recruited Craig Harai to join the city, we had him pegged for Executive of Housing, Office of Housing, but his expertise and knowledge on the private activity bond program and being able to review those applications and make sure that we got them awarded dictated to us that he go to DPP, which is what he did. On the question of whether or not we have anybody identified, I'd like us, the mayor, to speak to that because I don't want to step on his toes. So I'll let him respond to that.
Thank you. You know, what I've really come to understand is the amount of knowledge one has to have. It's one thing to learn as we go, but also the way the game is played, the way this business has been set up, there's no substitute for knowledge, especially when you start talking about HHFDC, 201H, et cetera, et cetera. So just today, we hired that person. I'm not at liberty to tell you right now until we get paper signed and a couple other things have to take place. But I'm extremely excited because we've spent some considerable time trying to figure out who could best lead this department. Because I think I put a premium on leadership. I put a premium on leadership on people who are willing to come forward to understand that they're going to be held accountable, whether they succeed or fail. And, you know, there's not a lot of players in there with that kind of knowledge who have that kind of mindset. And I think we've gotten there. Just today, before we came in this meeting, I told Mike we got a yes. So I'm very pleased because you're absolutely right. We need to have that person in our midst. Absolutely. And I feel very good about the road ahead.
That's great news, Mayor. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that good news with us. Somehow I had a hidden feeling that that's what you were going to say.
Thanks for the question.
I'm just kidding. That's just great news, though. But we understand, too, that it's such an important job. And the fact that you yourself are rolling up your sleeves and working on this is really impressive. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just my last comment is, again, there's a lot in the hopper, which is really exciting. And at the earliest convenience, if you can share that previous plan with us, I'd love to read it. And then I do have a lot of questions, but looking at the time and other council members, so I'd love to meet with you separately and we could go over some of the other things. And I have a few ideas as well. So thank you.
Anytime, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Wire.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully mine won't be too hard either. I just had a couple of questions based on what you shared today. I think there are about approximately 40 development projects in the pipeline that were mentioned. And out of those projects, do you have an idea of about how many will be produced and how does that line up with our 3 to 5 or 10-year outlook? What are what's the outlook of the scheduling of these projects that you have mentioned in the pipeline?
Councilmember Okimoto, I'd like to think about that and get you an answer. I actually need to look at the projects. I don't want to just offer something today off the top. I have an idea, but I'd like to sit down with Kat because they're the development professionals and have Kat tell me what a realistic time frame for like Kunia Boxcar Lot, Delight Bakery, all of those projects, and then produce that to all the council members so you can know what we're looking at. I'm happy to do that.
That would be great. And I know your office had reached out to my office just with the scheduling. It was really hard to try and meet before this hearing. So if necessary, we'll schedule something in the very near future. The second question was, and you kind of mentioned this earlier when Vice Chair Kiaina had mentioned her questions, but if you could maybe clarify, just in the short term or maybe even long term, what are the biggest hurdles these projects are facing, and how can we as a council look to eliminate some of the red tape? You talked about the regulatory burden, but what can we do if there's any specifics that you could share with us so we could help the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, right now, the biggest obstacle and the biggest impediment to us getting more done is resource capacity. And you're going to see, I think, in the budget that we're asking for more to do more. But right now, when you look at Scott Hayashi and Kat Tashner, you're looking at a team which they're the workhorses for Department of Land Management. We simply have to have more real estate experts that can go through due diligence, that can negotiate, that can make sure the city is making the best financial decisions in the interest of our taxpayers. We do not have the resource capacity to do that. And it's not from lack of trying. We have gone to the local law firms and we have tried to encourage through money, through PSCs, contracts, instead of through civil service positions, them to come to the city to help Kat and her team, and they won't come. And so now we're looking at going out with contracts to real estate professionals to have, we simply have resource capacity issues. In all the departments, they have to be there at the table for due diligence. So DDC has to be there to help Kat look at the suitability of the infrastructure. And they're down 30% in staff. So we're doing as much as we can on our hiring program, more job fairs, more advertisements, more hands-on, reducing time for processing. We're working on all of that, but at the end of the day, we suffer from the same challenges that the private sector suffers from. People do not want to work. I don't have the solution for that. They go all the way through the hiring process. We call them, we make a job offer to them, and they say, no, thank you, I'm not going to take the job. And I find it everywhere I go in the city. I went to Jiffy Lube this week, hour and 45 minutes at Jiffy Lube, because he said he can't find people to service cars. And he's paying $30 an hour. So it's a city problem, it's a private sector problem. That's number one. We need more resources in the city to be able to do these programs. And then the second thing I think is just the time that it takes. I mean, this process to go through due diligence and to buy a property that you want to turn into an activated TOD development with 750 to 1,000 homes, it takes time. It takes about 1.5 to 2 years to go through that process. So it's the time element of getting through this. None of it is easy. The easiest one is to just buy a building that already exists. It already exists, it's coming off the market, go buy it. But even when you do that, you have to be very careful that you're making smart decisions in the best interest of the taxpayers, that you're not buying something that we're going to turn around and put a lot of money into. We don't want to do that. So
Thank you, Managing Director. Just a couple of comments. I agree with you. Thank you for sharing. And I guess as a council, we'll continue to look how we can support you in the areas, because we know that this is a very important area that needs to be addressed. I do hope that this is not our jurisdiction, but I think just what you're sharing, we've heard repeatedly across the board about the importance of getting people back in the workforce. So definitely not incentivizing people to stay home anymore is going to be where it can be started. And I look forward also to, thank you, Mayor, for giving us some great news, because I know last month when we had this hearing, a lot of us were concerned about the plan, and I'm looking forward to what you guys can show us based on what was presented in the previous administration. And I know Chair Waters talked about it, but I'm hoping that working with whatever was left with you guys and the new person coming in, I really would hope that we could see something. And again, I ask if possible if there's baseline metrics, a comprehensive plan, because while this is really, it was informative, to me it was a summary of things, and it would be nice to see an actual plan from the city of how we're going to address the housing issue. And I know it's not going to happen overnight, but I appreciate you guys and all that you guys are doing. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I just wanted to say thank you. I'm really looking forward to meeting with you about all the projects in my district. And yeah, it's super encouraging. I hope that people are watching, one, go back to work, two, we love using the word hope. And if you're watching, I hope that we see through a lot of these programs, because I know it's going to help a lot of people in our community. So thank you for that opportunity. I look forward to meeting you in the office.
thank you, Council Member.
Well, hello, everyone. Just quickly, because I know we're pushing up on time. So some things to consider. Don't necessarily need an answer, but I wonder if it'd be helpful to have someone from the council, either a member or staff, at any of these stakeholder meetings, given the the potential for working on legislation, right? And also, I'm wondering if, as we're learning as we go, if the thoughts on, since everyone here already has a lot of other work besides just this, if the administration's thoughts on Department of Housing has evolved at all. Something to consider. I don't know if there's an answer today, but.
So Committee Chair, thank you for both of those. Mayor and I are actually working on both of those, and I'd like to reserve my comment at this time. But I do want to say to all the council members, I sort of feel like I owe you an apology as a managing director, because I feel like, given the Sunshine Law and the difficulty that it makes for you to talk among yourselves, we have not done a very good job of communicating this to all of you. And I read the article in the paper from Chair Waters regarding the lack of a plan, and what that screamed to me is that you don't know about all of this. And we want to get better at this. We're not here, we don't own this. There's none of this that we do without council. None of it. You appropriate the money, we're trying to expend it in ways that make sense. So we want to get better at communicating with each of you, and we're open to learning from each of you. Like Vice Chair Kiaina wants to educate us on her community and why it's distinctive and how we can work with DHA to help her constituency. We want to work with all of you. So I'm here to say that honestly, we want to do better. Mayor and I are committed to do better working with council on solving these problems. We don't own it. We view this as a collaborative relationship, but we do want to make systemic change. We really want to change the way the council and the administration do affordable housing going forward. So I appreciate those questions and comments.
Mahalo, MD. And then just a couple quick comments too. I'm excited that the Iwilei Resource Center, you said, is moving along. Because like you said, I know there's an issue with the color money. So a portion of that property does have to be used for housing, given the proviso language. And then a portion of that property can be used for services, right? For homeless outreach and whatnot, yeah?
So if you buy the property in its entirety, and this is a large parcel, if you buy it with tax-exempt affordable housing bonds, it restricts the entire property. You can't say this piece and that. So we'll talk to council about how we view the options that we have.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I think part of the issue was the proviso language for each bond, right? But maybe additional information's come about, but I know part of the proviso language is more restrictive than the other. So when it was purchased, the portion, in the kitchen was intended to be services, right? And then I think the intention was to have housing in the rest of the units. But then, of course, I think that, depends on what type of provider is available. But just wanted to flag that.
Understand, and we're still researching that right now.
Appreciate
with
that.
Bond Council.
Yeah, no, thank you. And then regarding the affordable housing solicitation, I was just curious if the pending one has the old proviso language, or it's still restricted to just the purchase of vacant land with construction or renovation of already owned properties. Because I think what happened when the last RFP went out was that there's an interpretation of the proviso language that was narrower, I think, than maybe was needed on what the word development meant. And so I think it excluded a lot of projects from the application process. So I mean, I'm just wondering if that's been remedied and the pending RFP would actually be available to all projects allowed under the ROH and the charter, because I think that's probably what was intentioned when the budget was drafted. But maybe there is some folks wanting to be cautious with the interpretation of the proviso language.
Yeah, and Committee Chair, I'd like Darrell Young, if he has information, to share that with you.
Yeah, mahalo.
Thank you, Housing Chair. Yes, as the planner who did the first solicitation, yes, we need to resolve those questions and the interpretation of BFS and core, so that it's as broad as the council intended the language to be.
I appreciate that. So just wanted to flag that, because when it goes out, I guess how it's limited or interpreted will affect who can apply, right, and get funds.
Yes, as we found out the last time.
Yeah, so I'm hopeful if we dive into that interpretation, maybe it can be broadened.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah. No, thank you. And then I just real quickly, the Waialawa TOD development, I don't know who that would be, MD, if you are another person, but what exactly is that looking at? Is that by the rail station, like the Banana Patch area, or somewhere else?
If I could, I'll have Kat Tashner come up and speak to that.
Okay.
Precisely. It's the Banana Patch one. We're working with HART, DTS, the TOD team at DPP to figure out, well, what could we do there? Could we co-locate housing with the rail station?
Oh, that'd be great. Does it include a potential walkway across Kamehameha Highway? And I say that because someone is going to get hit at that crosswalk if we don't have, appropriate safe measures.
I think especially when you add on what KS is doing on the Mauka side, that is one of the things we're looking to solve with that.
Okay, mahalo for that. Yes, MD.
I just wanted to add, Mayor and I had a meeting today with Roger Morton about that elevated pedestrian crossing, and they have put in for a federal grant to receive federal funds for that project. But if not, we're also working with HART to see if that project can be built for sure, for public safety.
Okay. Appreciate that. That'd be awesome. I'm sure Councilmember Okimoto would appreciate it too, but I know a lot of folks in all the districts coming on. Yes, Mayor.
Just 1 minute. I just want to echo what Michael said. We can do a better job of communicating, and we probably should have, and we'll continue to work better with you because you are essential to what we're trying to do. But just for perspective, tomorrow makes 26 months since we've been in office. We came into office, the Office of Housing in this city had 2 people. And those 2 people, one of whom is sitting behind me, is excellent, spent most of their time on homelessness. And as we've already showcased, there was a plan, a well-written plan, in fact, sitting on the shelves that really wasn't being executed. And what was being done through land management was really kind of a haphazard strategy of acquisition. So given the fact that we came in 26 months ago in the middle of a pandemic, and that's what we found, and that's what we are today, I'm damn proud of, okay? But we can do a better job working together because we have to, because this is absolutely critical. You know, we went through a health scare crisis, if you will. This housing crisis existed before and exists now, and we have to do everything we possibly can. So I'm pretty proud of where we are. I'm not saying we can't do things better. We will. I'm excited to announce our new housing director, but we're going to go forward. I just want to add that context. It's not perfect today, and I really appreciate the questions that were asked. And I'm not saying this defensively at all. It's just where we are right now and where we intend to go. I think is a good place, and we need you to help us get there. So thank you.
Mahalo, Mayor. Appreciate that. And Managing Director, I need to go over just to check if we have remote testimony. I believe we have a registered testifier. Angela Young, are you on? Go ahead and proceed when you're ready.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair, and the committee. Angela Melody Young, testifying in strong support. First, I'd like to praise the City Council and, of course, the Mayor and his administration for their efforts. Their efforts, they do it with such passion. And previously in the Kirk Caldwell administration, they were not as effective with managing the homeless. And so, when the current mayor got into office, they implemented, instead of enforcement and sweeps, they implemented CORE, Crisis Outreach Response Engagement, one of the first slides that we saw. And that has been one of the most effective things, although it's a very small program, because it reflects the STAR Colorado program. So I'm going to talk about STAR a little bit because of our work in safety. STAR is implemented through Denver's Office of Behavioral Health Strategies, and it's to address the city's mental health needs. And the team connects the key players in the city's efforts towards greater mental health well-being and helps the stakeholders working together to strategize solutions. OBHS believe that visionary leaders in the public, private, nonprofit, and church sector could find better ways to meet the citizens' mental health needs.
Mahalo, Angela. If you could summarize.
Okay. Yeah, so the office implemented STAR and recently implemented SET, Street Enforcement Team, and the result was reduced strain on the critical city resources, remove barriers to access, address inadequacies, while strengthening the network of mental health resources. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Mahalo. Any questions for the testifiers? Since seeing none, no other registered testifiers, do we have anyone standing by?
Chair, there are none.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have in-person registered testifiers?
Chair, there are none.
Okay, and then is there anyone from the public present today in the gallery wishing to testify? Sensing none, members, we're in discussion. Any additional comments, questions? No, appreciate everyone's time. Mayor, Managing Director of the team, of course, our staff for staying late. Meeting is adjourned.